Ignatius of Loyola. Oh, thank you. Recording. So we're going to be talking about the examen, which is from Ignatius of Loyola. So I wanted to start off to see what your knowledge or experience with the examen has been for the people that are gathered with us today. Anything you'd like to share about what you know about the examen for maybe people who don't know, or what you have been exposed to?
So I can share that I guess what I'm going to share about is the daily examen, which would be a practice that, as its name implies, you would do on a daily basis, but and often you would do it in the evening, just to kind of take time to review your day and how your interactions were with God and with others that day. And you talk about it's kind of a I guess what you are looking for is what happened that day that made you feel close or closer to God, and what happened that day that made you feel separation from God, where you either didn't feel God's presence or you felt like you were far away from what God wanted for you that day. And so just kind of a daily, I think, Amanda just said an exercise that you can do just to kind of live more thoughtfully about your relationship with God and with others.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wade. Any other thoughts or experiences that anybody wants to share? So yeah, that was a really good explanation, Wade. I know there's probably people here who have never heard or experienced the examen. And Glenn and I first learned about the examen at the church we went to in Queens. But I like the word of calling it a practice. It's a spiritual practice that really can just help you reflect on your relationship with God over any specific time period, or even over a significant experience. So a lot of times we talk about the daily examen and happening in the evening, but there is a lot of flexibility within the tool that you could do a midday examen, you could do an examen over your week, you could do an examen over a year, you could do an examen over a situation. There's not really a lot of rules around doing it. And there are also many different places or situations that you'd want to do it. And you can also, it's flexible in terms of that you can do an examen solo, or you can do an examen in community. But the overarching goal is to increase our awareness and attentiveness to the presence of God in our daily life. So a positive examen that focuses on the positive can also be something that helps create an environment where people feel bonded together. And the negative side of the examen can also help recognize mistakes and be really great for learning and growth. And it's just a practice that can, it can be a way that God can speak to us through our feelings and our yearnings, our experiences. And two of the words that are used with the examen are consolation and desolation. Consolations being the experiences that fill us with joy, life, energy, peace, that idea of feeling close to God that Wade mentioned. And consolations connect us with God, and they also connect us with ourselves and with others. And desolations are the experiences that drain us or feel like death to us or disconnect us. We feel disconnected. Those would be the desolations or the negative side of the examen. So before we talk really any more about the examen, I wanted to give everybody a chance to experience the examen. And I found a video that can guide us through. It's about 5 minutes long. And this would be an example of a solo examen, like doing one by yourself. So as the video plays, we will all be alone together, which the idea of being alone together is like, you know, you're alone with yourself, but you're still like within community. So we get to practice that virtually by doing this guided examen. And as we get ready to do this, I want to encourage you that if you are a person who likes to write things down, you can write things down, or you can also just use this as a thought, like internally, like what you're thinking in your head, and respond, but you're not going to respond out loud because we're going to be alone, but we're going to be together. So you're going to respond in your own head to the questions that come up. And if any of the questions don't really resonate with you, just kind of wait for the next question. If you find yourself getting distracted in the middle, like, or you realize that your mind has wandered, there's no shame in that. Just kind of acknowledge that, like, oh, well, my mind wandered and now I can get back to what I was doing. So don't shame yourself for not being able to focus completely or anything. It's just, you can just be aware of that and get back to what you're thinking when your mind kind of recenters back on the questions that are happening. So if you'd like to write and you have pencil and paper, feel free. Otherwise, just get comfortable. It's this, an examen, it's going to kind of use some language that makes more sense at the end of a day, because then you have like a whole day of experiences to think about. So when it talks about the day, if it helps you to kind of use that word loosely to be like yesterday or the last few days or the last week, just kind of change that in your mind to don't get paralyzed by the specifics of the words. If it says like the day and you're like, well, I just rolled out of bed and turned on Zoom, so everything's good so far. Another thing before the examen is just to kind of take a minute to center yourself. You could take a deep breaths. Some people like to light a candle if that's available to them. You could close your eyes, anything that just kind of helps you feel quiet and still, and to enter into this. So you were told that there would be no math. Oh, did I say something mathematical? Okay, so Wade, if you could play the video through your screen and we'll do the examen and then we'll continue our discussion.
Right.
God, I believe that at this moment I am in your presence and you are loving me. God, you know my needs better than I know them. Give me your light and your help to see how you have been with me, both yesterday and today. God, help me be grateful for the moments when people have affirmed me and challenged me. Help me to see how I have responded and whether I have been kind to others and open to growth. God, forgive me for when I have not done my best or have failed to treat others well. Encourage me, guide me, and continue to bless me. As I look to the remainder of this day, make me aware that you are with me. Show me how to be the best person you want me to be.
Thank you, Wade. So I wanted to start off with that as an example of an examine because I like the fact that it could hopefully create a little bit of a mood with the music, a little bit more than me just talking you through an examine. And I like some of the examples of the questions or the thoughts that were used in that. Does anybody have any thoughts to share after experiencing that? What was that like for you? What did you notice? What came to mind?
I thought it was beautiful. It was really beautiful and made that I need to do that more often.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet.
I've started doing a nightly sometimes because I forget the next morning, but chronicling what should by the end of the year be 2022 blessings. So every night I'm writing down a list of things that I am grateful for, and it's made me a lot more mindful during the day of what I'm doing. So I appreciated as he was walking us through that, it prompted something that I was grateful for yesterday that I could write down. And that was just some growth in how I handle certain situations. So I appreciated the particular questions, I guess what I'm saying, because it really prompted, oh, yes, that, So that was good. Thank you.
That's awesome. I love that idea, Amanda, of writing down blessings and things that you're grateful for every day. And I think that the examine does like really lead to a lot of gratitude, which I think is part of the power behind it. So thank you.
I was gonna
Any other
say,
thoughts?
like,
Sorry, Molly, go ahead.
just like what, so like conversely, I think the reason why those different questions really work is that sometimes when we only think about things in terms of like gratefulness, that like we forget that there are things that like we might be brought closer to God and for things that we aren't always as grateful for initially. So I think that's why that like that different way of thinking really helps put things into perspective.
I have an Apple Watch, and in the morning it says, before your day gets going, take a mindful moment to reflect. Or not reflect, but it didn't it didn't say the whole thing. I'd have to look at but anyway, and I have one that says that at night to reflect upon your day.
Oh yeah,
My
that's a
watch
good reminder.
reminds me to think what's happening, what's going to happen today, and what happened today, and it's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah,
It's a reminder on my watch.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think for me, the examine, especially the questions that they were asking in that particular practice, is it makes me kind of hyper aware of my social interactions, and part of it is, I mean, it reminds me of when I was in a more liturgical church setting. We talk about, things that were done and things that were left undone,
Yeah,
and so, things, and so when I'm thinking about like opportunities that I missed to show kindness or something like that, I think, those are the things that I think it brings up in me when Molly was talking about kind of the both sides of of the examine of and how different things might bring you closer to God, whether they feel good or not. I remember back when I was learning about the examine and they were using that language that you mentioned, Sarah, about consolations and desolations. I really had to think like not of my my normal definition of those, because then to me, consolation is just something that consoles me and makes me feel better, and desolation just is like, oh, destruction and all of this. But when they talk about spiritual consolations and spiritual desolation, like you could be doing something that feels very good or makes you feel very happy, that's enjoyable, but is actually something that's taking you and your attention away from God, or
Oh, yes. Yeah.
allowing you to do something that's not kind to others because you're focused on your own happiness, and so that would be classified as a desolation, even though it makes you feel good. And conversely, there are times where, for example, we're in grief and we would say, oh yeah, that's desolation. But if you're in grief and you're with God in your grief, um you know grieving might bring you closer to God. You might understand better God's grief for the world and for us, and so it's, I just remember when I was first introduced to the concept and they were using those terms, I had to kind of redefine for myself, like in this context, what those things are. But your mention of attention, and like all of the words um, that we can associate with that, like attendance. Um, you, you Someone said on the thread the other day, echoing, attendance is not a prerequisite for care, um, you know, and so there's so many ways that we can attend to God and attend to ourselves and pay attention. Um, and so, yeah, I think just this opportunity to focus one's mental attention um, towards things that you probably had passed over in the moment, um, gives you a chance. Um, and I think the big thing is when you notice that you didn't take an opportunity to be kind, to be able to say, not just chalk it up to, okay, well, next time I'll do better, but, maybe you can go back and be kind to that, or maybe you can go and say, I really missed an opportunity yesterday when you said this. I just wanted you to know that, that I care about you, or that you can let me know if you need anything, so like you can go
Yeah.
back, and this doesn't have to remain purely a kind of an end of the day between you and God checklist, like, oh, here's where I messed up, here's where I did okay. And the next day, like it can actually, like you can go back, there are do-overs, um, and you can take it out of the exam and back into not just saying, well, next time I'll do better, but sometimes it is possible to go back and say, I was thinking about it later, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And I like how you kind of brought up again what I kind of went over quickly at the beginning with the consolations, experiences that connect us with God and with other people, and sharing love, and desolations being experiences that drain us or disconnect us from God and from other people. It's not just about like happiness and sadness, although those can be consolations and desolations that can give us clues about how to better connect with God and with ourselves and with other people. Any other thoughts right now? So to be clear, like that was just one example of an examine. And like I said, I mainly wanted to use it to like give us all the experience just to go through one and have the nice mood music. And like, I really had hoped today to create like a 5-minute little mini retreat in that moment, and a mini time of reflection with Don talking about restoration last week and the new year, and talking about the idea of resolutions or practices. And if you hadn't ever heard about the Examine, I think it's a pretty cool little tool to have in your back pocket, to use in different seasons, to be able to reflect on yourself and grow closer to God and with others. But that was just one example. And I actually have like a PDF file that I can share with everybody that kind of goes through the recommended method and some sample questions that you can ask. So when you see that, if you decide to use this and apply it in your life, you can choose whatever questions seem the most helpful to you, whatever really resonates with you. Some examples would be, what times were you aware of God's presence throughout your day? And when were you not aware of God's presence? When did you feel like you were moving toward God? When did you feel like you were moving away from God is another way to say it. Were you receptive and responsive to God's guidance? Or what was blocking your responsiveness to God's guidance? Or when did I feel most alive recently? And when did I most feel life draining out of me? Or what brings you life and what brings you death is pretty similar. For what moments am I most grateful? Goes back to the gratitude piece that Amanda brought in. And what moments am I least grateful? When did I give and receive the most love today? When did I give and receive the least love today? When was I happiest today? When was I saddest? Or it can even be as simple as, what was highs and lows? You can use this in a completely secular environment to build community by hearing about people's highs and lows. And the last one that's on this list is, when did I feel the greatest sense of belonging to myself and others and God? So for me, I wrote a few thoughts out that I wanted to share. Personally, the Examine helps to ground me, to really focus on who God created me to be. In a world of social media and information overload that has many definitions of what success would be, I could feel peace when I focus on the movements that are going on with me internally, because I can sometimes be looking outward so much at what I could be doing with my time, what I could be accomplishing, what others are doing, what others are accomplishing. And if I don't reflect on or take time to reflect on my life, I miss out on the amazing and beautiful things that are a part of my life I've actually built in because of kind of reflective thinking around the Examine. So using a tool like this, even formally and just informally, like a lot of times I think there's communication tools and spiritual discipline tools, spiritual practices that it really helps to like do it what I would call formally, like follow the suggestions, try it out for a period of time. But what's really beautiful is that when it like, after a while, it just starts to seep into your life and it starts to change how you think about things. And, you know, every time an opportunity is presented to me, I'm always slow to say yes, because I want to take the time to think about how does this fit in with where my life is right now and what time I have. And even if it seems like a wonderful, beautiful opportunity, what is going to be impacted by agreeing to taking on another opportunity. So I often like reflect and assess and adjust my life and my schedule to get closer to those consolation moments, and then try to be curious about the desolation moments and notice those for how they might be shaping my future. Like, okay, I decided to do this thing and it's really taking a lot of time away from my kids or away from my husband or away from connecting with God or away from other priorities. And I consider a desolation. So maybe the next time this opportunity comes around, I'm going to say no, thanks. And as I was thinking about that, I was reminded of, there was a quote that like I said so many times, probably about 10 years ago, I don't know. from Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest, there was a quote that said, "The need is not the call comes from your time with God." And I think the examine is a chance where we can hear God calling us. What are the things that God created us uniquely to, that the ways that we give love, the ways that we feel excitement, what our passions are, and how we can contribute that to the world and to our community, and not trying to be something that we think other people want us to be, or what we think the world wants us to be. And that even if there's a need out there, the need isn't just necessarily always the calling. The call comes from this kind of reflective thinking, because there are many wonderful good things that we can choose to do with our time and our resources. And this can be kind of a discerning tool. And if we do an examine on any regular basis, it can start to show patterns, and you can really start to like learn about yourself. And this is where writing down what comes to mind can be helpful, because then you can go back and look at it with fresh eyes over a period of time and see what patterns come up. Agnes Sanford coined a term, well, she didn't coin the term sealed orders, but using it in a spiritual sense. Sealed orders were usually a military thing, like when a message was given or instructions were given and they were not to be opened until a certain particular time. And she said, she imagined that we all have sealed orders from God. And she meant that as if before we were born, each of us talked with God and about this, our special purpose of while we're here on earth. And throughout our lives, we kind of gradually peel back those sealed orders. We get to discover more and more deeply our unique sealed orders, which the way that we are gifted to give and receive love in the world, is how she put it. And I like that focus on how we give and receive love. So any thoughts before I go on a little bit more?
I have a little kind of etymological rabbit trail to go down based on something you said when you were talking about, when you're presented with opportunities. Like one of the things that, the practice of the examine, it sounds like it has given you is more permission to say, both to say no, but also to say, well, let me think about that.
Yeah.
To kind of say, wait, like I don't need to respond immediately. And that's one thing from contemplative practice in general, is this idea that number one, we don't need to respond immediately. Number two, we can respond thoughtfully to things, and we can also think about our responses and our immediate reactions to things. We can kind of think about those. But one of the things etymologically, the word attend, like attention, like the French cognate actually means to wait. And it's carried over. So for example, when we call someone a waiter, it can mean someone who's waiting, but it can also mean someone who's attending to something, like a meal. They're attending to your needs in a meal. And so this idea that that sometimes attention, like we're using in the examine, might mean waiting, that we're waiting on God, that we're waiting on, is this one of those sealed orders that we've been waiting to open? Is this opportunity that we might have been waiting for? Or if I say yes to this, am I going to miss out on something that I have been waiting for, and so this idea that, the examine and other spiritual practices give us that pause, that they give us back some time And if we use that time just to wait, it is not time that is wasted. That waiting is attention. That that being kind of internal and self-reflective doesn't mean that we're never going to act. It just might mean that we're waiting to act till we're sure, till we're ready, or until we know that it's something from God. So,
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Any other thoughts that anybody has at this point? So another way that the examen can be used is used in a group setting. You can use it on your own. And that's mainly what we were talking about, but you can also do it in a group where you process verbally, or also where maybe you journal whatever questions, guiding questions, and then bring it to a partner or bring it to a group. And even in that idea, the idea even of being open to the examen, having different sentence stems or questions that inspire you, or realizing that I'm a person who wants to journal before I process with people, or I'm a person who wants to process out loud. Like, even those things in itself are, those are like mini exams, because you're learning and kind of asserting feels like a strong word, but asserting like your preferences. And similar to like what Wade was saying, I think if you are a recovering or currently a people pleaser or fear of missing out or anything like that, then this pause can help you get in touch with that and help you take up the space or take the time you need to state your preferences. Don, is your hand raised?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Do you think that like, do you have a recommendation of kind of like an order of depth of question? Because so I didn't grow up in a liturgical setting or a setting that did very many, if any, like more what people might consider mystical type experiences or spiritual practices. And so I find that sometimes I end up avoiding some of these because they take me to a place that my mind won't let me go right away. Like for instance, the video we just did was great. It didn't feel like it was asking me to change my personality to participate in it, right? Because it was just very basic reflective things. But I think some of what you're talking about is intriguing to me, to be drawn deeper into some greater introspective spiritual questions. But I feel like if I just jumped in to that, I'd also jump right back out and be like, well, that was interesting. And I'd wait till the next time something like this was taught. So Sarah, do you have like any kind of suggestion, ideas, or thoughts about maybe a way for I think about yoga when they say, now reach down and simply touch your toes. And I'm like, yeah, simply touch my toes. That's adorable. The same thing here. I fear that there could be like a simply do this. And I'm like, I'm so far from being able to simply do that it becomes a barrier in and of itself. So yeah, I guess I'll stop repeating what I was saying. So yeah, examine for dummies. Exactly, Craig. Thank you. Yes. So yes, sorry if I'm derailing, but just what you're talking about is beautiful, but also I know my trepidation towards some things, and I would just get in there and be thinking too much and not actually reflecting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it would be helpful, but when you brought up yoga, it reminds me of one of my favorite yoga teachers says, find what feels good. And not to be like, she'll say to do a move, but one of her like sayings is to find what feels good. And I think that's part of the reason I think I mean, why in the handout that I wanted to include a wide variety of the questions that you can use so that you can look through that. I mean, it can also be overwhelming to see because my personality, I see all those questions and think I'm supposed to answer all of them. But really it's reading through the list and seeing like, or just methodically like trying out each one. But maybe even just by reading, there will be like a spark of one that seems like it's easier or resonates with like you being willing and wanting to respond to that. And I think also thinking about our personality types or our preferences, like if you want to have a partner and practice it out loud and verbally process out loud, or if writing it out would be better. But I think like the questions, like if you start also with, I mean, I hesitate to give like exact circumstances because all I can share is my personal experience, but like I like the questions of life or death makes it pretty easy for me. Like with Abby and I mean Meadow to some degree, we use like high points and low points, like, or what was the best part of your day, or what was difficult today. And so I think like also based on your personal preferences and like what the situation is, if you're doing it in a group, you could choose sentences that fit that. And there's also like opportunity and times where you would just use a positive examine. So if you were in, maybe you were doing like a team building type of thing or working with a group of people and it's not necessarily a place that like enough safety or comfort has been built up to go into the desolations, you could just do a positive examine and talk about what were the high points or what are the things that we appreciate or what are things are we grateful for. So I don't know if that helped at all.
Yeah, it helps. I think I think just the express permission to kind of, wade in to what you feel comfortable with is really helpful. I think, I think if you came and jumped into a personal Bible study with me, where it's the way I study the text, that a lot of people would be like, check out pretty quickly, right? Because I can get caught in a minutia of something for a couple hours, and people are like, can we just move on to something more interesting? And so the same way that I feel like there's ways to bring people and introduce people into studying the text that is more successful and tangible early. And someone might venture on to the point where they're nerding out like I am over the text. I feel like the same thing. I feel like where I'm always trepidatious is that as not a more mystical mindset, but a more analytical mindset, that a lot of spiritual practices kind of assume you're already mystical in some way, as opposed to inviting you into it. So I appreciate you saying what you did. So yes, it did help.
Cool, yeah, and I think it's, I mean, it feels a little bit weird to think of like something being a tool and being so malleable and so like, I mean, it could be weird, like depending on your personality to, if you're a person who likes to check off, if you're a rule follower and wants to check off the list and do something correctly, to take something new that's you're being introduced to and be told, like, well, you could do this 100 million ways can also like not be helpful, but it is important to realize and give that like grace to ourselves. And that's part of the discovery process. And I think if you're willing to like wrestle with this tool for a little while and try different ways, then hopefully eventually one would speak to you and really connect. And that's part of why when I was talking about the tools, like I recommend following like the guidelines that are suggested and at least trying them out that way. and then taking what works for you and leaving what's not working for you, and having just a ton of like grace and kindness to yourself around that. Kind of like the same thing, like if your mind starts to wander, and when I've like experienced centering prayer, they talk about that as well, that if you're, or silent prayer where you're praying in silence and then suddenly you catch yourself thinking about something totally off the wall or a rabbit trail, instead of feeling shame about that or that you're not doing it right, just kind of turning to wonder or turning to curiosity or turning to just be like, oh, well, that happened, so now we go back, and it is what it is. So yeah, where I was going to go next is talking about doing it in a group setting. So like doing in a group setting, a couple different ways that you can do it would be just to everybody verbally sharing as they feel led, and sharing always being an invitation, not an obligation, just kind of like our discussions here on Sunday. If you're doing it in a group setting, it really helps to have really good listening skills, that people are not interrupting or offering advice. It's not really like a platform for advice. But if you have a group or a partner or a friend or somebody that you can do the examine with on somewhat of a regular basis, it can help to be a discernment tool. Because over time you can see patterns of like, well, here's something that you always, or a lot of times you bring up in a constellation that I noticed, or here's something that you bring up a lot of time in desolation, and just pointing out the patterns, and sometimes having an outside perspective of somebody that you're walking through it with is really helpful. And I think it's actually kind of fits with how we structure our Sunday mornings. Like basically our celebration time is a time of consolation. And our prayer requests are example of sharing some of the desolations or things, or concerns in our life. So we actually kind of have this built into our community. And I really wanted to point that out because I think sometimes I'm just caught off guard. Why am I caught off guard? Because every week we talk about celebrations and I don't have anything to say. Or maybe I think my thing is silly or my thing is not significant. But every time we share during the consolation time, we are getting a chance to bond as a community. So when we get to hear about Janet's family and her trip and how wonderful it was, we get to be happy because we love Janet. So we get to walk in that happiness with her. And we also get to learn a little bit about Janet, that things that she likes and things that she doesn't like, and the unique, beautiful gift that God made Janet to be, all simply because she's sharing things that she's celebrating. And the same thing with our prayer requests, that when we hear what is on people's hearts, it's kind of like an examine moment. And we can notice patterns too, that when people are praying about similar things or similar big ideas are affecting our community, then we can be aware of that, and we get to see the passion and the kindness and the care that God has planted in us individually. So I wanted to bring that up for myself and for everybody, to not feel pressured that you have to share celebrations and prayer requests every week, but to maybe put a slightly different lens on sharing, that it's not just about you getting something off your chest. It's really a gift to the community, and it can bond us as a community because we are getting to learn about who God created each of us to be through those little things. So it's nice that we already have that built into our Sunday mornings as kind of a built-in examine that we get to connect over. And of course, that kind of thing can happen when we gather in informal ways as well, and just get to know each other. But in this way, I think that we can help direct each other and guide each other when we see potential and we see God's calling on people's lives and giftings, and we could point that out and we can affirm them and acknowledge them and encourage them because we are getting to know them. through these types of reflective questions.
Yeah, I was just typing in the chat. I was like, well, we already do group examine when you brought in, about our praises. And I think, maybe, our work today around kind of reframing the question or reframing consolation and desolation might also give more permission to people, that when we're talking about praises, it's not just, oh, I didn't feel particularly happy this week. It's, what happened this week that that felt where you felt God working. What happened this week where you felt you were being drawn closer to God. And I think of all the times where people say, well, this is a praise but also a prayer request, and it's because they're feeling closer to God and they're still in the midst of that. And so it's still a prayer request because them seeing God's hand in something leads them to want to pray for that. And so, and it kind of, shows how, we can, something can bring us closer to God and bring us to prayer, even if it's not what we want, but it's what we're dealing with, and so that can be, something that, like bad things that do actually draw us closer to God or show us more of God's character or our own character, So, so yeah, I think it's good to acknowledge that we're doing that, and also now we have some new language that we can use from time to time to invite people to share those, or people that have a practice of the examine. They could be like, oh, I never thought about just sharing my consolations on Sunday, and saying, oh, this is when I felt closest to God this week, and that's a praise.
Yeah. Anybody else? So another form of the examine is the grand examine, which is a spiritual inventory where you kind of examine your reality, reflecting on a larger chunk of time, maybe 6 months or a year. And so it kind of feels natural to possibly do this around the new year. And I have another handout that I can share once I figure out the best way to share it with you all, that you can use this to look back on if you want to try it. So you can use the Grand Examine as a journaling exercise solo. You could partner with somebody to talk through it together. But the basic components of the Grand Examine are to look back, to look forward, and to look around. So looking back, you're looking back over the past year or whatever designated time you've chosen. And then on this handout, there'll be a list of questions that you could consider. And as you approach this handout, again, just if something is causing angst or a question you want to skip for the time being, just skip it. There's a lot more there that you can roll with. So examples of some of the questions that you could think about over the past year: what were some life-giving moments or experiences? What significant changes have come your way? When have you been the most stressed? What words would you use to describe your current state of being? Or even summarizing the past year in just a couple of sentences. And that all fits under the looking back and the reflective part of it. then you can look at what you've said or think about what you said or look at what you've written and try to see if there's any patterns or themes that have characterized the past year. And the next step would be to try to look forward. So asking yourself, where do you sense God leading you forward? Or what do you sense your soul needs in this season? What are some invitations that God might have for you? What are your hopes and dreams for the coming year? And then the last one is looking around to ask, what community support do you need in this season of life? Who are the people you need to invite to walk alongside you? How can others, especially those with whom you are in closest community, best support you? And I think when we get to the look around questions, we're actually really good at asking those questions in our Dust community. I hear those a lot. I hope that you do too. What support we need. But sometimes I think we don't always know how to answer the question. So maybe what we need to do is a little bit more of the looking back and the looking forward of reflection to figure out what we need for support. And when we think about like the question, what do you sense your soul needs in this season? A lot of times we rightly prioritize meeting the physical needs of our community. And we think about, well, what are my basic needs, and are my basic needs met? And if my basic needs are met, then maybe I shouldn't ask for anything else. But we are a spiritual community. So if we have spiritual needs, then these are things that we should also be free and feel comfortable talking about when we need support. Maybe we need a retreat. And I was talking about this with Don yesterday, and he had mentioned the idea that if somebody were to need or want to go on a retreat or want to explore something that would help their spiritual growth, that we as a community should try to support them as best that we can, whether it be financially or with time or with ideas, and being comfortable talking about those kind of needs as well, and how we can support that as a community, to help each other grow and feel that connection to God, and to walk together through the ups and downs of faith and connectedness. So, yeah. Any thoughts about any of that?
I love the idea that we are recognizing that the spiritual needs are our needs as well. It's not just physical or material. So, and that's so funny because I've talked before about my need for retreat, but I've never thought about going, hey, Dust, can you help me out? I really need a chance to go and have some alone time with God. I need a mountain moment, kind of a thing. And I think that that's beautiful and something that if we have the ability to as a community to encourage that. So I love that idea. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, like asking for a retreat or asking for like alone time, because alone time is really valuable and good for my soul. It feels like incredibly indulgent. Like, and recently, like in the past couple months, Glenn and I have built in, we changed Saturday to Dadder-Day. And so we just automatically default to Glenn's in charge, hanging out with the girls. And it's like been really helpful for me to know that I have that time kind of built in. And sometimes it's discipleship I do, sometimes it's running errands, sometimes it's planning, and it still feels indulgent. But yeah, I just want to share that because like, if it feels indulgent to like ask for things like that, that just might be like bad scripts that, or you know, family of origin stuff like kind of surfacing, because like, why would it not be reasonable for me to take a couple hours and, you know, like I check in with Glenn and he actually loves the time. So it's like a win-win for everybody. And yeah, so it's okay to be indulgent, and we need to care for our spiritual needs. And I feel like I went maybe a little bit off trail there. I mean, but part of what I was thinking is, for me, when I get to the point of like needing a retreat, it sometimes has been like brewing for so long that it just feels like indulgent, but also like there's like this something I'm having a hard time putting into words, that like there's just like a bucket or like a pit, and no matter how much alone time I get or how much retreat I get, it's never going to be enough. So why even like ask or like start to do that? And I just want to say that it's a lie, because like I felt that way in the past. And then as I gradually built in more regular alone time, regular retreats, not that it's always been perfect or smooth, but over the course of years, I can see now, like I used to be so like drained for alone time and retreat that like I would just felt like so desperate for it. And then it got to the point a couple years ago where I had like decided I was going to take like a chunk of time before we had this like built into our schedule. And I like left the house and was going to have alone time, and took my Bible or did a couple things that were like encouraging. And then like after an hour, I was like, wow, I really want to go back home. And like, it felt like an enormous pit, but like, it wasn't that deep and it wasn't that unreasonable. And it might just be the way my mind works to think like things can be so extreme. But I just want to encourage everybody that like, it doesn't have to wait to get to that extreme point for you to ask, even if it's not even coming from a desperate point, if it's just coming from a curiosity point, like I want to learn about something spiritual and I just need a little bit of support to get there, or I need ideas about how to grow in this area of my faith, or I need financial support to be able to do this, or I need a place to stay so I can do this. And those are all like valid things to ask for. So
yeah, I would say that what you're saying there, Sarah, is really important, because I think we do tend to think of it as in, oh man, I need a retreat, which is a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to need a retreat or want a retreat or do a retreat. I think those are very necessary, but we should make sure we're not focusing on them solely and leaving out the very real need to take self-care time weekly. You know, I mean, I just think that a lot of us kind of get this like almost like self-sacrificial, either self-sacrificial or maybe combined with like work obligations or, you know, things like that, where it's just like go, 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 go. And then you're like, well, you know, in a couple months I'll take a retreat, but in the meantime, I'm just going to keep making sure everybody else gets what they need and that I get these things done. And, you know, so, I mean, I'm with you. Like sometimes if I can just take an hour, you know, that can be really rejuvenating.
yeah. Thank you, Tana. Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to, what Tana just said, excuse me, remind me of Rabbi Heschel, his book on Sabbath, where he talks about how we often misuse Sabbath as the thing that makes us, that kind of, he didn't use this language, he would never to, he was too eloquent, but it's our Red Bull to get us through the next week, right? It's our energy drink. And instead, Sabbath is what the week builds up to, not what sustains us through the next week. And I think to what Tana's saying is, if we're doing good self-care, then a retreat doesn't become the thing that restores us as much as the thing that I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but instead it becomes a pinnacle as opposed to pulling us out of the depths. I think it can do both, but I think that if we do have that intentionality of self-care day in, day out, whether it's, I used to try and have 2 hours of silence every day, and not 2 hours of consecutive silence, but I would just note when it was silent and be like, and strive to find and steal 2 hours of silence every single day. And that was so good for my soul that when I did get to Sabbath, I wasn't spending half my Sabbath recovering from the week, but instead my Sabbath became a time to feel and want to use that time for my closeness with God. So, yeah.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
I have a lot of time on my hands, too much. And Sarah, if you need someone to come and watch the kids while you go and have your me time, I would just give me a call or let
I
me
would
know.
love that. Thank you, Janet.
Can I make, I know we're late in the time, but between my conversation with Sarah yesterday, which was awesome, and the discussion about dust switching some of our mindset when we talk about, taking care of the needs of the community, not just being solely about, physical, financial, but also spiritual needs. We have such a creative and wonderful group. I want to throw out an idea that came to me while you all were talking and see what we can do. And that is, I want to schedule a virtual retreat for our church. And top of my head, this is just an idea, that each of us go someplace for a weekend, for 2 days. And I'm not saying we all go to the same place because of social distancing and everything, but I'm saying we all go and we go, but there's things on the schedule for us to get together during that retreat time that is us sitting together and having some conversation around things like this. So we'll do a retreat where we're actually getting out of our homes, getting out of our locale, and getting away. And I think it might be interesting, especially for a non-completely local church to do. I also think with the pandemic and not wanting to gather a large group of people together, it's still a beautiful way for us to be able to step away, maintain togetherness. And I don't know about you guys, but woods in the middle of the night scare me. I don't find that peaceful. I wait for Jason to come out of the woods, not Craig. So for me, I find peace and respite in a city. Craig clearly finds respite in the woods. And this will give us all the opportunity to go someplace that we feel peace and rest, but then also have something meaningful together. So I'm rambling again. So I think we have an awesome team that would come up with something amazing.
Yeah, I love that idea. I could totally see that working.
What do you mean by retreat? Do you mean alone by yourself, or do you mean like with the family?
I think however you would want to do it. So I would imagine that Tana and I would go somewhere, but she might want to be alone. I'm not going to speak for her. But Tana and I could go somewhere. The Minardi family could go somewhere, but then in the same way, like I said with Tana might decide, no, I actually want to go someplace different by myself. But just like if we went to a retreat facility, all of us together, we'd have time where we sat down and had gatherings during that time. And so we would just do the same thing, except for virtually from wherever it is that we are in our retreat space, to say, okay, from 8 to 9 is going to be an examine. We're going to get together and have an examine together. And yeah, so anyhow, this group is super creative, awesome, and amazing. So I have no doubt that if this does intrigue enough people, that we could come up with something super cool. So
to the point of like practicing such that there's not so much pressure on that, I think if we did plan a retreat, it would make sense to actually do, I don't know, Sarah, when you were talking about examines, I was wondering if you were implying that we might do a weekly examine like in the middle of the week, which like I personally would really appreciate. I mean, even if it's by myself, but like doing that as a group would be really awesome. But like I could see that, you know, where we, whether or not it's sustained throughout the year, or if it's just leading up to this retreat, that we are practicing some of that mindfulness such that we get more out of whatever that would be. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that thought had crossed my mind, something like that in my preparation. And I remember when Craig and maybe a couple other people had launched the 4 o'clock. Was it the 4 o'clock or was it the 4:20? I don't know. Whatever the time was that, and it was like, for me, it was what? 419. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I like where your mind's at.
So, yeah, and I think it kind of reminded me of that idea. It could be something that just adds a little bit of like structure, but there could be like another time that we have, especially with the pandemic being a little bit more shut down now, where we set up a weekly Zoom just to do like an examine and a check-in. I mean, I know, Craig, that time was not like conducive for my personal schedule, so I never got to see what that was like, but I do love that idea, Molly, and I think that's something that we could explore. And in theory, we could actually have multiple, like if somebody's like, I want to do this and this is the best time for me, and I invite you all to jump in, and then somebody else says, well, that time doesn't work for me, so I'm going to do one on this day at this time. So. Okay, any other thoughts before we wrap up? So I wanted to close with a quote from Carlos Rodriguez. He is part of the Happy Givers team. He does work in Puerto Rico, and this kind of doesn't relate to where we ended the conversation, but I thought it was a good quote to think with the examine, also because sometimes facing the desolations, like looking them in the eye, so to speak, can be a difficult thing. I'm the type of person that like, if I make a mistake, I like to just like forget about it and move on and not dwell on it. So like purposely like calling up those things can be difficult. But I think for me to face those things and those patterns can also help me grow. So he had shared this quote on his 40th birthday. Ironically, I'll be 40 in a couple of weeks, so maybe that's why this resonates with me. So he said, here's my first ever old man advice to y'all. Radically accept who you are to the core. And in that radical acceptance, face your worst, take responsibility, find a therapist, get to work. In that radical acceptance, fully honor what you like, what you hate, and commit to loving, forgiving yourself. In that radical acceptance, figure out what sets your soul on fire and give your life to it. No shame, no matter what anyone else says, burn. And in that radical acceptance, do work for the benefit of others. Serve joyfully, give extravagantly, be humble, and love all. So thank you all. And can I ask, what is the best technological way to get a piece of paper I have saved on my computer to everybody? Is it through
fax
the
machine?
Snail mail? I'll snail mail it. I guess, Amanda, are you still on? I don't have everybody right in front of me.
Yeah,
Can you
I
tell
would
me if, is that some, I'm sorry, is that something we can attach to the email easily or no?
we can put it in the email. We could also, you can post a PDF in the chat too.
Okay,
I would say you probably would get more eyeballs in the chat because I don't really know what our open rate on our Dust email is, if anybody actually looks at it, so.
okay. All right, maybe we could do both then if it's not a huge effort to attach it to the email, and I'll put it in the, because I think not everybody exactly is on the Facebook chat, and I don't want to put it in the chat here because this chat disappears when,
So,
We
yeah, just
hang
if
up,
you
so.
could get it to me ASAP because I have the email almost ready to go, so.
Okay, I'll go down and turn on my computer now then, or after prayer requests. So, yeah, let's transition to prayer requests.